Geographical variation. Geographical variation means spatial variation. Geographical variation of desertification vulnerability in western Rajasthan. You as a student of geography are well aware of the state of Rajasthan, which is the largest state in geographical area in India today, and the western part of it, the western Rajasthan, qualifies itself to be the area of Rajasthan west of the Aravallis mountains. That means it is an area on the lee side of the Bay of Bengal branch of monsoon. When Bay of Bengal branch of monsoon reaching the Aravallis mountains, by that time most of the monsoonal capacity is already exhausted to the east of the Aravallis mountains in eastern Rajasthan. And when the winds cross over the Aravallis mountains, and Aravallis, are one of the oldest mountains of the earth's surface, you are all aware of. So I'll be trying to speak out and spell out before you certain things which are very commonly known to you, and would try to link up the understanding about desertification to your general understanding of the area of western Rajasthan. So when the winds are descending, you all know when the winds are descending on the other side of the mountains, when they are descending, the compression from the atmospheric compression increases and descending winds become drier, and therefore rainfall decreases or gets depleted as you are moving westward. And therefore the state of desertification takes place in this context. Now I would just like to see certain aspects, meaning and concept of desertification. The first thing that we have tried to understand is meaning and concept of desertification. What is the meaning and concept of desertification? Let us try to understand. In the literal meaning of desertification is making or evolution of deserts. How deserts are formed. And deserts are there, an environmental entity from a time immemorial. But what is important today is that desertification process was always taking place in the post-Pleistocene period. But in the Holocene is the Anthropocene. The Holocene is the period of man's influence. Man's influence is Anthropocene. So because of the human interference, because of the growing and increasing capacity of man, the environmental conditions are facing and finding it very difficult to sustain themselves, and there is a sort of degree of deterioration and decay in the environmental conditions. So what is desertification? The first thing that we say about desertification, lowering, degradation of the biological production potential of the arid and semi-arid areas. Arid areas and semi-arid areas are subsequently qualified what are the arid areas and semi-arid areas. Climatological qualification I'll try to make out. So the thing is, in the arid and semi-arid areas, under the combined influence of environmental constraints and the human interference, or the human actions of exploitation. And therefore the second aspect is, it is a process of desertification is, various concepts have been given by the people according to their general understanding of the word desertification. So it is a process of the degeneration or depletion of the life supporting systems under anthropogenic exploits. So the focus is man. Anthropogenic exploits. Our actions, our utilization is one thing, when we say utilization, it carries a positive connotation. When we use the word exploitation, it carries a negative meaning, negative connotation. So, utilization is out of the need. Utilization of the environment and resources takes place out of the need. Whereas exploitation of the environment and the resources generally takes place out of the greed of human beings, the greed of the race of development. The race of development between the international community and amongst the nations at international level and also intranational level also. So the competition is there. The world is competitive, and this is the blessings of the capitalist system of the society. Now the other thing is, in a common parlance, in everybody's language, in everybody's understanding, desertification is the expansion of desert-like conditions towards the desert fringe. So there is a desert. Desert was made because of yesterday's processes of environmental degradation and of today's continuous process. So this is the desert area. Desertification is making further expansion of the desertic conditions outside the desert delimitation towards the fringe area, outside. For example, in 1952, the first symposium of National Commission of Sciences was made in India in 1952, and what was the realization in that National Commission? That the Indian desert, there was a hue and cry that the Indian desert is expanding towards the fertile Gangetic basin at a rate of half a mile. 1952, the unit of measurement in Rome was mile and not kilometer. Half a mile per year, and that raised a big bogey of hue and cry. But this hue and cry of 1952 National Symposium led to the awakening of our government agencies, and therefore a very important scientific institute came into being to address the problems of desert and desertification, and that was Central Arid Zone Research Institute, Kazri at Jain. I had the good opportunity of being many a times a beneficiary of the Central Arid Zone Research Institute at Jain. So we find that this is conditioned towards desert fringe. And then lastly, I have given you some of the basic concepts about it, which to your mind you must be recalling and raising questions in your mind. There are almost similar things. For example, desertification is the weakening of the natural life support systems or ecosystems. What ecosystems? Both the terrestrial ecosystems, weakening of the terrestrial ecosystems, as well as the aquatic ecosystems, land ecosystems and water ecosystems. I am using the word aquatic ecosystems or water about the desert. You know that the deserts are also the places where there are water holes, where there are ponds, where there are talab for the wildlife to survive at. So when there are uncertainties, particularly the climatic and monsoonal uncertainties, the shrinking or dwindling of the water holes, पानी तो जीवन है ना, और वो animals, वो गज़ाल, वो deer, the animal of the most beautiful eyes. Yeah? Here I would just like to derail myself from this particular. When I talk of the beautiful eye of the gazelle, I was just I was one of my field studies here in very interior of Rajasthan in Jaisalmer district, and I was talking to them. There is because of the Urdu poetry, there is a glorification of the beauty of the deer. But to my mind, it always occurs to me, I have seen it very watchfully, and I have a poetic expression of myself about the beauty of the Aligarh cow. मेरे ख्याल से दुनिया में गाय से ज्यादा खूबसूरत आंखें किसी की नहीं। खूबसूरती तो देखिए उनकी आंखों की, तो फिर प्यार न करें। I may have a reverence for the cow, you may have a religious value for the cow, but the thing is, both are to the liking of the cow. The animal which is not environmentally akin to the Indian desert. Now, apart from it, let me say, after giving the meaning and concept of which one? From there. Okay. Yes. Now coming to the desertification definitions. Now look here. There was the concept of desertification. Now we are coming to the very firm and definite definitions of desertification. You know that the definitions of the term desertification were devised in the wake of the prolonged Sahelian desert of the 1960s and 1970s, whereas desertification is yes, this one. So prolonged Sahelian desert. What is Sahelian desert? Most of you must be knowing. The sub-Saharan belt, the semi-arid sub-Saharan belt just below the Sahara desert is called Sahel region. And this is the region which is nearly co-terminus with another famous area which you have already studied in the study of major natural regions, the savanna grasslands, the savanna region. The Sahelian region, there was a prolonged desert drought. So prolonged droughts of 1960 and 70s took place. In response to it, United Nations Conference on Desertification was held in the year 1977, May 1977 in Kenya. And in the deliberations of the United Nations Conference on Desertification, the points which were raised were United Nations Conference on Desertification in 1979 defined desertification as an aspect of widespread deterioration, not expansion only. So there is a word which I would like to distinguish between deterioration is endemic to a particular area. किसी भी एरिया में एनवायरनमेंट घटती चली जाए और कमजोर होती चली जाए तो उसको हम कहते हैं deterioration. और फिर वो कंडीशंस दूसरी जगह स्प्रेड आउट करें. I thought I was in the same old esteem of my stride of my own self in the classroom where there generally is not a possibility of, and therefore I took this liberty of coming off the mic. Anyway, I'll just try to see. So the thing is, I'm already shouting, you see. So the point here I would like to say to you is widespread deterioration of the ecosystems under the combined influence of the climatic conditions, climatic parameters, and the human exploitation of the dry areas. So dry areas, what does it mean? That dry areas are inherently endemic Desertification. Desertification, when we talk of desertification, we don't talk of the equatorial regions. We don't talk of the monsoon regions, but the fringe of the monsoon in the Indian desert. So, this is now the second definition, Harold Dragney of the Arizona National State University. He was a great scientist of the National State University of Arizona. He gave a definition of referred to desertification as the impoverishment of the terrestrial ecosystems largely under the impact of man. So the same earlier general understanding that I was trying to dish out before you is the same derived out of these definitions under the impact of man. Under the impact of man who is living in the desert. Here I would like to distinguish. Not under the impact of the man who is making barely sustainable life in the desert, but because of our market pressures and influences upon him. For example, overgrazing is one of the major reasons of desertification. So when we talk, one of the major reasons of desertification is overgrazing. Are we saying we are trying to blame the shepherd for desertification? So, injudicious on our part. If the shepherd is making the grazing of his lands, it is because of the market pressures which are inducing. Because out of his grazing of the flocks of his sheep and goat, he has a fleet of 200, 300, 500 sheep and goat. But if you see his standard of living is the poorest of the poor tribals anywhere in our country are in Western Rajasthan, particularly in the extreme western districts of Barber, Jaisalmer, Bikaner, in these areas and parts of Ganganagar also. Now the situation by the Indira Gandhi Canal Command area has considerably changed. I'll come to it in the back end. So, Harold Dragneys, and then United Nations Conference on Desertification 77, other eminent scientists of desertification, environmental scientists, Granger 1998, 1990, and United Nations Environmental Program, UNEP, in 1992, have applied desertification to the aspects of environmental degradation in the world's dry lands. Environmental degradation in the world's dry lands. So it means when we talk of desertification, we mean its process in the dry areas. And the dry areas are what? The arid areas and semi-arid areas. And the arid and semi-arid areas are those where the aridity indices, the NAP, the Paimana of aridity, dryness. The intensity of dryness has been measured by a device started by in 1954, this particular formula for devising the aridity index was by Thornthwaite, famous climatologist Thornthwaite. In earlier on there was, and then he gave a revised formula in 1954, and that is aridity index. Where aridity index is high, the vulnerability of desertification will be high, and likewise. So what is aridity index and how is it measured? Aridity index is measured in terms of potential evapotranspiration in an area and precipitation. The difference between the gap between potential evapotranspiration and precipitation. I'll further qualify it. Okay. What is potential evapotranspiration? Potential, not actual, not actual evapotranspiration. Potential evapotranspiration means the potentiality of an area to evapotranspire the water if it was available. So I will give in my common parlance the meaning and definition of what is potential evapotranspiration. Potential evapotranspiration in other common parlance to my understanding is atmospheric प्यास. एटमॉस्फेयर की प्यास कितनी है? तो if suppose in Jaisalmer the annual potential evapotranspiration is 2073 millimeters. 2073 millimeters मालूम है कितना हुआ? एक आप जो पैन evaporation A का जो पैन होता है ना, उसको उसकी तो 21 सेंटीमीटर खाली ऊंचाई होती है, 21 सेंटीमीटर ऊंचाई होती है. ऐसा ही आप एक को रखें और उसको अपनी छत पर नहीं, एक पर्टिकुलर ग्रासलैंड वगैरह के एरिया और वो 2 मीटर ऊंचा हो, बल्कि 2100, और उसको आप पानी से भर दीजिए. साल भर उसके ऊपर जो धूप हवा पानी पड़ेगी और एटमॉस्फेयर उससे रोजाना अपनी प्यास बुझाएगा, एटमॉस्फेयर. तो 1 साल के अंदर वो 2 मीटर ऊंचा, 1 मीटर मीन्स 1000 लीटर्स, ओके, एंड 2 मीटर मीन 2000 millimeters of height. So potential evapotranspiration is the atmospheric gas, the capacity of the atmosphere to drink water from the land, from the soil, and also from the trees in the form of transpiration. Evaporation takes place from water surfaces, from land surfaces, from soil surfaces, but transpiration takes place from the leaves of the trees. So, and that's combined called as evapotranspiration. And precipitation is the actual availability of water. The actual availability of water is equal to amount of कितनी बारिश होती है. So the thing is potential evapotranspiration minus precipitation is equal to, precipitation is always less, so is equal to water deficit. Water deficit upon water need. Water need is again the potential evapotranspiration, the same 2073 into 100. If it comes to 66% and above, it is arid. If the water deficiency is more than 66%, the areas are arid. If it is, and then going further on, and then if it is less than that, it is semi-arid areas. So the arid and semi-arid areas are not defined only on the basis of amount of rainfall alone. No, all the climatic variables have been put into calculation, and then a complex formula was simplified by Thornton, and then so now the difference between desertization and desert, there are certain terms which have been used by scientists. The earlier term was desertization. So this was the term for, so it was in use for desertification before the 1977 United Nations Conference on Desertification. So some of the definitions go like they are. Can you read them? Because of the contrast ratio problem is there. Desertization is concerned with the creep of desert-like conditions. When we talk the creep of desert-like conditions into the areas where they should not climatologically exist. Creep of desert-like conditions. Desert-like conditions creep in what way? The most obvious and visible form of creep of desert-like conditions is the blowing of winds through aerial agencies and expansion of the sand. So that was related to it. Desertization is concerned, and Europe, 1968 defined desertization as the extension of typical desert landforms and landscape. Expansion of typical desert-like landforms and landscape. Remember here, when we use the word landform, we use it in natural context, natural landform, relief, right? When we talk of landscape, landscape is man-made, mostly man-made. Landform is natural-made, landscape is human-made. One of the biggest geographers, he was a cultural geographer, in fact, you might have called Sayed. The first book he wrote about in 1925 was on the morphology of landscape, where he does not talk of physical landforms. He says landscape are human construct, and so the human influence has been explained to. Rapp 1974 defined desertization as the spread of desert-like conditions even in more than 600 millimeter rainwater annually. Otherwise, in a common parlance, all those places which have 500 to 300 millimeter rainfall, right? Generally, are semi-arid areas in western Rajasthan. And those areas which are receiving less than 300 millimeter rainfall are considered arid areas. But one factor alone can never be a satisfactory basis of classification of the arid or semi-arid land. That is why aridity index is the most scientific basis of defining the climatic types. Then Mustafa Tolba in 1992, he was the executive director of the UNEP, United Nations Environmental Program, distinguished between the terms desertization. He said desertization is regardless of the human cause. So earlier definition was regardless of human cause, natural. Whereas desertification is a word which means a process caused by man. So responsibility of man was aroused in this concept of desertification in the 1977 United Nations Conference on Desertification, and subsequently Mustafa K. Tolba, who was the executive director of the UNEP, distinguished scientifically between these two terms. Now coming to the extent of desertification vulnerability in Western Rajasthan. Western Rajasthan has a total geographical area of nearly 2 lakh square kilometers. Right? In this 2 lakh square kilometers of area, 1,37,000 square kilometers area is arid. 64,868 square kilometers of the area is semi-arid. And then the source of this work is Salahuddin, my daughter, who had done her PhD on desertification in the Indian desert. We have some experience to share for a moment with you. My teacher, Professor Ejazuddin, a famous teacher of Jawaharlal University, you are aware of it. He did his PhD on the human geography of Indian desert in 1962 under the supervision of Professor S.M. Ali Sahib. Then I did my PhD under Professor Muhammad Shafi on the dryland agriculture in the Indian desert. Then one of my earliest research scholars I did on district as the unit of inquiry. Then when another desertification study was conducted under my supervision by Professor A.R. Siddiqui, who is the head of the department until recently in Allahabad University, he did with at tertiary level desertification. And then I asked my daughter, much afterwards, recently, that you take up the study of desertification at village level. So she identified 175 villages on the western fringe, particularly in the Jaisalmer district, adjacent to the international border, and courtesy to the government of India, Ministry of Defence, we were given all support and all that to the bordering villages where nobody is allowed to go. Their study was conducted. So she had identified for the first time hyper-arid land. Can anybody just estimate that Indian desert, there is a strip, there is a narrow crescent. एक बिल्कुल जो पहली तारीख का या दूसरी तारीख का चांद होता है, उसकी तरीके से बिल्कुल एक नैरो क्रेसेंट है और वो हाइपर एरिड है at par with any desert in the world, including Saudi Arabia, about Khali, the empty water. Otherwise, Indian desert was considered as a mild desert, a moderate desert. But the extreme west, the people are living there. Extreme west, there are areas she identified as the hyper-arid, which was 3.3% of the area. What I want to say is that all these areas are vulnerable to desertification by different measure of intensity. Hyper-arid areas are already desert. Hyper-arid areas are already desert. So when there is a point. When there is already a desert, why do we talk of desertification? Desert तो खुद है, फिर वहाँ desertification क्या? So the concept of desertification is that desertification takes place on the desert margins as well as it might take place in the heartland of the desert by further accentuation of the intensity of desertification is not a stationary concept, not a stagnant concept. Deterioration हो रहा है environment घट रही है, घटती चल जाएगी, पता नहीं कितनी घटेगी, वो एक्सप्लेन करूँगा आपको. Look here, just a minute. When there is imperceptible loss, जो नजर, environment का loss हो रहा है, धीरे environment घट रही है, लेकिन नजर नहीं आ रही है हमको. Environment का घटना अभी हमारी आंखों के सामने आया नहीं, तो आंखें नहीं खुली ना हमारी, नहीं आया. वो क्या है? That is the initial stage of desertification. Initial. When the loss of the environment is apparent before us, apparent. अब हमको loss of environment नजर आने लगी. That is the advanced stage of desertification. और आखिरी बात है, when there is deterioration of the environment to the extent of sand dunes. Stage of desertification. And may I share with you? Sand dunes are the graveyard of the environment. Sand dunes are the graveyard. देखिए ना, graveyard होती है कब्रिस्तान में खबरें यूं होती हैं, मिट्टी की खबरें पुराने जमाने से हमेशा होती, मिट्टी की खबरें ऐसा ढेर बना कर आते, लोग वहाँ छोड़ जाते हैं अपने नियर एंड डियर वंस को दफनाने के बाद, तो वो ढेर वो ये माउंट. Sand dunes are the graveyard of the environment. Now coming, please, next one is now major. I'll just go. I request you for 10 minutes. Okay? All right, thank you. I don't know because I have taken from my esteemed colleague the watch and I have myself come off the watch. Major indicators of desertification को नापने के पैमाने क्या हैं? Meteorological indicators, topographic, edaphic. Topographic जानते हैं आप, edaphic pertaining to soil, hydrographic conditions, the surface water, biotic indicators, flora and fauna, anthropogenic indicators, mass, technology and socio-economic conditions, demographic indicators, land use and land cover indications, and techno-economic related indicators. This next one, yes, meteorological. All these indicators which I had subset of 7, 8, 9 indicators were there, and then particularly meteorological indicators, spatial distribution of rainfall and all that. You can read them out. The next one, please, the right. Yes, here it is. This shows 600 millimeter rainfall here in the Pali district, here in the Jhunjhunu and Sikar district, very good rainfall areas is. And as you go westward towards Churu, Hanumangarh district, Ganganagar district has been bifurcated, or you know, the Hanumangarh district, Churu, and Nagaur, Jodhpur, Barwar. As you go from east to west, the amount of rainfall is 100 millimeter rainfall. 100 millimeter rainfall is decreasing. So this is the climatic gradient. As the rainfall is decreasing, water is the most important factor. The intensity of rainfall, in fact, vulnerability of desertification. Desertification बढ़ने की क्षमता, अन्वेषण, वो बढ़ता चला जा रहा है. Next one, please. Yes. See here. Denser choropleth. So mean annual rainfall is higher over here. It is decreasing westward. Here lowest. As the amount of rainfall is decreasing, desertification का अंदाजा increasing. खदशा बढ़ रहा है. Next one, please. Yes. Number of rainy days in a year also important indicator. यहाँ पर देखिए more than 30 days है number of rainy days, और यहाँ less than 5 है. यहाँ पर जनाब आपको जो मानसून के ज़माने में इनसेट का इंडियन नेशनल सैटेलाइट की वो आती है, देखा पूरे हिंदुस्तान में बादल होंगे अगस्त के किसी पर्टिकुलर वीक में, और ये थोड़ा सा पोर्शन इंडिया यहाँ पर बादल नहीं है तो फिर बारिश भी नहीं. तो आप समझिए कि दिस ग्रेडियंट ऑल्सो शोज द खतरा और खदशा ऑफ द डेजर्ट. नेक्स्ट वन प्लीज. यस, कोएफिशिएंट ऑफ वेरिएशन ऑफ रेनफॉल. Inverse relationship between amount of rainfall. Higher is the amount of rainfall, lesser is the rainfall variability. Lower is the amount of rainfall, higher is the. अब आप देखिए rainfall variability from 30% over here to over 70% variability. एक साल के अंदर from one year to another year 70% तक सरप्राइज है मौसम की रेनफॉल और rainfall variability in general. So where towards the west rainfall variability is high. Rainfall variability in simple words is rainfall uncertainty. Sure नहीं है बारिश, तो desertification के chances बढ़ गए. Next one please. Yes, I am running about. This is aridity index. Very high. And then towards east. So Jhunjhunu, Sikar and Pali. These are the districts where there is lower aridity index. Next one please. Drought occurrence. Desertification is not the same as drought. Drought is reversible. Drought एक साल की कंडीशन है, 2 साल की कंडीशन है, लेकिन ड्राउट बेसिस बनाता डेजर्टिफिकेशन की इंटरनेशनल कॉन्फ्रेंस यूनाइटेड नेशंस की का. But drought is not desertification, क्योंकि it is reversible, self-reversible. 2 साल बारिश बहुत कम हुई, तीसरे साल बारिश above normal. When for 2 years the rainfall was below normal, deficiency, but the 3rd year it was above normal. उसी से एवरेज बन जाता है. तो ये drought conditions की. Next one please. Cumulative hydrographic vulnerability. Next one. अच्छा, जी हाँ, ये I have taken this from my daughter's work. डेजर्टिफिकेशन को कंट्रोल करने के लिए हमारे हिंदुस्तान में हुकूमत ने एक प्लान बनाया। ये जो सतलज रिवर है उससे एक बड़ी कनाल निकाली, इंदिरा गांधी कनाल। राजस्थान की तकदीर बदल दी, वेस्टर्न राजस्थान की तकदीर बदल दी, तकदीर बदलने के लिए। लेकिन आखिर में हुआ ये कि ये कनाल है, आप देखें रिडंडेंट हो गई। तो हुआ ये कि इस एरिया में कनाल इरिगेशन आने से पहले जो भी छोटी मोटी सूखी फूकी घास फूस जो थी, ग्रासेस एंड श्रब्स, ये सॉइल को पकड़े रहते थे, मिट्टी को बांधे रहते थे, थामे रहते थे। तो सैंड ड्यून्स नहीं बन पाते थे। सैंड ड्यून्स बन गए, सैंड ड्यून्स बन गए तो क्या हो गया? एनवायरनमेंट का क्या बन गया? एनवायरनमेंट का कब्रिस्तान बन गया। तो ये जो छोटी मोटी जो घास फूस है, ये एनवायरनमेंट का कब्रिस्तान होने से बचाए रहती है, थोड़ी सी जिंदगी प्रोवाइड कर देती है। अब जब कनाल इरिगेशन आया, थोड़ा सा पानी पहुंच गया, कुछ दिन के बाद फिर पानी चलना बंद हो गया। तो फॉर इरिगेटेड एग्रीकल्चर जो भी घास फूस थी, जो नेचुरल कवर था, उसको किसानों ने हटा दिया और उसके बाद हल जोत कर उसके ऊपर और पानी डालकर फसल ली। 2, 4, 6, 10 साल बहुत अच्छी फसल हुई। अब पानी की कमी पड़ गई, अब नेचुरल वेजिटेशन कवर तो खत्म कर दिया हमने, और अब पानी भी नहीं है। तो देखिए जो डेजर्ट एरियाज थे जिसमें वेजिटेशन कवर था वो रिमूव हो गया और रीडेजर्टिफिकेशन हो गया। रीडेजर्टिफिकेशन, रिटर्न ऑफ द ममी। मम्मी कौन? वो जो मिस्र है ना, इजिप्ट की जो क्वीन हुआ करती थी और वो किंग, उनकी वो मर गए तो उनको केमिकल से रैप वगैरह करके 3-3, 4-4 हज़ार साल तक उनकी बॉडी नहीं हुई। लेकिन मम्मी फिल्म आई थी रिटर्न ऑफ द मम्मी, थ्रेटनिंग फिल्म ना आप लोगों ने, तो वो डरावनी फिल्म आई थी रिटर्न ऑफ द मम्मी। डेजर्टिफिकेशन का दोबारा एक्सेंचुएट हो जाना is return of the mummy, largely related to the next one piece is cumulative indicators, and the next one piece is thank you so much for